call the Brattleboro Select Board special meeting to order for Tuesday, December 14th. Peter, has the meeting been properly warned?
Yes, it has.
Thank you. All right. The meeting's been confirmed. And do we need to approve minutes, or they're just here for the
Next week.
next week? Very good. All right. Peter, would you like to introduce the community safety review?
Sure. So we're here tonight for our second check-in on the status of the implementation of recommendations that were made in the community safety report. That was the culmination of the community safety review that occurred a year ago right now. The report was issued December 31st. The beginning of reviewing the report occurred during January and February, and on March 2nd of this year, the Select Board held a meeting at which you gave consideration to how to move forward with this body of work. There are in the backup materials for tonight's meeting, which are posted on the town's website and accessible from the homepage. There's a new memorandum that's an update that I'll be speaking from here in a few moments. I won't read it, but I'll summarize what's in it. It's a memorandum dated December 10th from me to you with the update for tonight. Behind that is what we call the implementation table. It's basically a spreadsheet that doesn't have numbers, but rather words in it. It lists the 41 recommendations, and it provides information in 3 different time frames. From that March 2nd meeting, from an August 31st check-in, that was our first check-in on how we were doing with moving forward with the work, and now tonight's summary information for each of the 41 different recommendations. And behind that, in the backup materials for tonight, are the cover memoranda from one dated August 26th, one dated February 25th. Just so that folks, if they want to see sort of how this has progressed over the months in this year, can look back and see sort of where we were at the outset, where we were at the end of the summer, and where we have arrived this evening. In the implementation table, as I said, there's a description for each time frame, including an updated one for tonight, regarding each of the 41 separate recommendations. I'm not going to go through those in that level of detail. There's quite a few of them where the status is unchanged from August 31st to tonight, but there has been some significant progress in certain areas, and so that's what I intend to summarize in the next few minutes. When I'm done, I'm sure you'll have some discussion, perhaps some questions about it, and we expect also public participation in the conversation with you, and I'm certainly available all night long for questions. Chief Hardy is in the meeting, has been directly involved in, and in fact, the determining official around some of this work, as I'll be describing in a few minutes. So she's also available for questions if you have them. The most important thing, in my opinion, that has happened in our work around these 41 recommendations since our last check-in over these last 3 months is the creation of the Community Safety Fund. That wasn't specifically recommended or envisioned in the report, but it's going to make possible the implementation of some items that otherwise there wouldn't have been a dedicated funding source for, and you would have had to, as you identified opportunities, look for what potential funding might be available for the town to make a commitment to certain things as alternatives to police being the first and in many cases only entity that we look to intervene in certain situations around community safety or unsafe circumstances in town. And so there are some recommendations that relate to initiatives that would be more preventative in nature, that would try to reduce the amount of times that anyone needs to intervene in an unsafe situation. There's also some recommendations that speak to how intervention may occur in ways that we rely on others and not on the police to be the ones who would address certain kinds of things. I'll speak in more detail in a minute about the variety of ways in which we see potential in that regard. But it's important that by an action of the Select Board about a month and a half ago, almost 2 months ago now, the Community Safety Fund was created with $200,000 worth of salary savings. We have, as we have dealt with separately over the course of the past 6 to 8 months, we have a significant shortage right now in police officer staffing compared to our allocated staff positions, which leads to a savings in the budget, as well as some operational challenges. But that savings at the end of the year would, if not allocated to something, to a specific separate fund, would fall to fund balance. And so since that is money that is, we're saving as a result of the lower numbers of police officers at this time, and we're going to need money for you to be able to make some decisions around town investments in certain kinds of initiatives, it felt very appropriate to grab that savings, set it aside in a safe place as the community safety fund, and then for you and future select board to be able to call on it to invest in these initiatives. I said in bringing that forward for your consideration in October that as staff proposed our budget for FY23 in November, we would recommend an additional $100,000, and we did do that. That is in the budget that you're considering for FY23, because while we are in recruitment and bringing on some additional police officers, that process takes a long time, and we don't see really sort of any imaginable circumstance where we would be fully staffed in police officer positions during FY23, which is the next year, the year that begins next July. That's important for a couple of reasons. We're going to come back also a little later this evening to the question of how many police officers does Brattleboro need. You won't substantively address that tonight, but it's a question that is sort of in the air, in the room, relates to this work. And I think it's important to know that there's some time before you need to make those decisions, because these positions don't get filled overnight. So we're at 18 right now out of 27 authorized positions. We don't believe that, you know, a few months from now, you'd be with even if the current recruitment is successful, we believe that that might get to 20, perhaps 21 or 22, but unlikely any higher than that. And so there's some time yet for you to be considering how to move forward with this, and then also the separate consideration of how many police officers. That's important. I'll note now, I intended to note at the end, but it feels like it's kind of hanging there. That's important because of the fact that I'll be retiring in 2 weeks. Yoshi Manale is here, but has just arrived here. And I think it's important that Yoshi have an opportunity to be working as town manager, be working with the community and with you, be working with Chief Hardy and the police department, and be in a more informed position, having that experience to call upon by the time he's actually advising you in your decision-making around that issue. Together with Chief Hardy, who it's been a very busy and productive 4.5 months for her. It's hard to remember sometimes that it's only 4.5 months, but in fact, it is only 4.5 months. So it'll be helpful also to Chief Hardy to have some additional time before being with you in the making of those decisions. I'll say one last thing about the Community Safety Fund and move on with the summary. So the Community Safety Fund, by being created as its own separate thing, will keep these funds available past June 30th of next year. So once you have decided how to move forward with a process to make determinations of when and how you will intend to invest those funds in initiatives in the community, you won't have to rush to get that done by June 30th as you would have if you were just trying to spend it as savings within the current year's budget. In fact, the $100,000 piece wouldn't be savings within the current year's budget. So it accomplishes that you're able to move at the right time in the right ways, and the money will be safe in the meantime. It also, by setting it aside, if in the future this select board or a future select board determined that it was appropriate to sustain that fund and put more into it, it'll be a place where you can continue to make investments, not necessarily just from savings, but more because that's feeling like the right thing to do based on the experience that we all have had as a community at that point with the further implementation of some of these alternatives. The second highlight from these past few months is we were asked explicitly in the community safety report to not increase the police department training budget. The select board did in fact make that decision a year ago that we as staff had proposed an increase in that budget that you were considering a year ago. You heard from the community about that, and you did determine to keep level funding of police training within the FY22 budget that we're now in. Chief Hardy and I brought to you a recommendation in this proposed FY23 budget that you're working with right now to maintain that level funding again for another year. So she is making the decisions necessary to make sure that the training that has to occur is occurring. The future decisions around discretionary training will inform future decisions that are made around funding levels. But in the budget that's before you this year, we are adhering to the recommendation to not increase the training budget. Another specific recommendation was, and I say specific because there are certain recommendations that were more, that had a scope that was more general in description, opening up sort of the possibility that certain kinds of actions might be taken. And then there were some of the recommendations that were very explicit. So the training one was very explicit. Likewise, there was an explicit recommendation to take project care, the operation and supervision of project care out of the police department and to put it into the community and to send the funds with it. The town has budgeted the last couple of years $16,000 that has been expended from the police department budget. Project Care, you may remember, first, I guess for people who are listening, I think probably people are aware, but just in case there's anybody who doesn't know what it is, it's a project, an interdisciplinary project, a collaboration among several different organizations in the community that was initiated several years ago by the police department to fill a void where the police department and the fire department were both seeing situations where they were dealing with survivors of overdoses who were survivors multiple times. They would go back to the same person multiple times. And through some communication with the community, found that there wasn't an active program to actually follow up with a person who had overdosed and survived that to offer the opportunity to get into treatment. And so that's what Project Care was intended to do. Because it didn't exist at the time, it was created by the police department, and it was coordinated with organizations in the community, including Turning Point. Based on the recommendation that it would be better for the police not to be, for a uniformed police officer not to be among the outreach folks, for the police department not to administer this program, and for the police department not to be so visibly involved in the field work for the program, but to step back and defer to those who are more, where it's sort of more their principal mission in this work. We have done that. Chief Hardy made this decision and has coordinated the transfer of responsibility to Turning Point, who is now administering the program and coordinating the field work. The police department is not involved in the field work, and the $16,000 has been provided to Turning Point so that they have those funds available to move on with Project Care. The police department remains involved in the program only to the extent that it is available for communication with Turning Point and does refer people to the program when there is interaction with folks. The program is made available or is made known to potential clients. The fire department intends to also be assisting in that work going forward. We were asked to eliminate the social worker liaison program. This is a program where social workers who are employed by and paid by HCRS are embedded in law enforcement agencies in Southern Vermont. There are several such social workers. There had for many years been one in the Brattleboro Police Department. Chief Hardy took a look at that and considered what was being asked of us, considered the role of the program within the police department and more broadly within the community, and did suspend the program. We no longer operate at this time with a social worker embedded in the Brattleboro Police Department. We do want to sort of put an asterisk on that one to say we have no specific intention to resume. We have suspended it indefinitely, but there is the possibility that as all of this work evolves, that in a reconstituted form in some manner that might feel more appropriate in the future than it did in the past, that she could envision a circumstance under which maybe the department would have an embedded social worker or some other kind of function like that that would be not a law enforcement function, but to assist in the kinds of things that a social worker can assist with. But for now, with that re-envisioning so undefined, and with so much of the rest of this work, feeling possible but not yet launched, Chief already made the decision, and I've supported her in it, that the program is suspended indefinitely. We recognize this is an important part of what I've been talking about in terms of those alternatives to the role of the police department in intervening in unsafe situations. We recognize that there are a variety of ways in which individuals and organizations in the community are actively working to develop alternatives, programs or initiatives, or in other ways just to increase the community's capacity to be a safer place that doesn't require outside intervention, and to have the ability to provide outside intervention other than law enforcement intervention when something other than law enforcement is a more appropriate entity to respond. I'm not able to speak very specifically to these initiatives because these are not town, by definition, these are not town projects that we're organizing. In fact, it's clear in the report, and I think it's an important part of the work that we've undertaken in this area, that these are things that the community is working on, that the community is committed to. There's a good deal of collaboration going on, as well as some things that are occurring of being worked upon within individual organizations. I'm aware of several of these. I'm excited about them, but it's not my place to describe them. We will see as time goes on, folks who are working on this feel comfortable that there's a time when they're ready to come forward and describe what it is. And I think it's going to be really important that the nexus between the further development of these community initiatives and the decision-making that you're going to undertake around, how to allocate funds from the Community Safety Fund, that those two things be recognized as integrally related. We also were asked to recognize that uniformed police officers carrying their firearms in certain settings, particularly in community meetings, can be disturbing to members of the community. And Chief Hardy has taken that to heart. She has been herself setting the example of most often attending those kinds of functions in plain clothes. And she also has been working on modifying, or not modifying the regular uniform, but having an alternative police uniform that the rest of the members of the department can wear when attending certain kinds of community functions, so that they will be dressed more casually and in a less military looking uniform. This will continue to be a challenging area, and for this idea of when to be armed and when not to be armed is not really the calculation at the moment. It is the calculation we were asked to undertake. At the moment, the calculation is when to be in the more traditional police uniform with a firearm shown versus when to be present in a, these are my words, less intimidating physical presence, where the firearm would not be shown and the person would be in plain clothes or in casual clothes. It's not to say that there wouldn't, under some circumstances, sometime in the future, be a determination made that there might be safe circumstances for police to participate in certain kinds of settings without their firearms. But at this time, we don't see that as being safe either for the police officers or for others that attend those functions, particularly in situations that include some degree of, sort of highly charged interactions among members of the public. So the goal here is to hear the concern and address it in the limited manner that we think is appropriate now, with an eye towards continuing to learn and consider as we go forward for potential additional changes there. And specifically, something that Chief Hardy has undertaken is in addressing the relationship between this sort of visible presence of an armed police officer, the relationship between that and use of force. They're two separate issues, but they certainly, one of the concerns about a uniformed police officer who is carrying a weapon or carrying a firearm into a meeting is the image that presents of using that force, potentially in a setting where there is no immediately perceived conflict going on. In the relationship there to the use of force and limiting use of force and emphasizing de-escalation in every situation possible, Brattleboro Police Department will be trying a new product called Bowler App that is basically a way to restrain a person without actually, so basically instead of a taser, where a taser actually disrupts body function and can be a traumatic experience for the person being tased. The Bowler App is meant just to be a way to secure a person without actually, having that kind of a physical impact onto them. So it involves a discharge of basically a rope that will cause the person to be disrupted only in their movements, not in their physiology. So that the police officers can move in and secure someone who needs to be secured, who's posing a threat to themselves or others, but in a way that is much less impactful for them than a taser would be. So creating another tool to be able to be used in attempting to never use more force than is necessary. So if a situation might otherwise have called for a taser, there will be times in the future when the Bowler App will be able to be used instead. We also are hopeful that there might be further development of the crisis intervention team concept. This I want to note and be really transparent about it being not one of the recommendations, but I believe related to the work. So I know that at least some of the folks who participated in forming the 41 recommendations in the community safety review feel that the crisis intervention team approach is still sort of it is an intervention that is brought by typically government officials, sometimes in collaboration with non-government officials, and always in a way that is meant to control a situation rather than to sort of provide the kind of supports that we're talking about when we talk about the alternatives and the community initiatives. So I want to be really clear that this isn't part of that work. This is town initiated, but it does represent the commitment that we've made to be learning from the experiences of other communities to how we can do better and be less reliant upon the police department as the go-to agency in all kinds of different situations that are not criminal in nature, are not law enforcement in nature, but where we as a society have come to rely upon them. And recognizing that that has caused harm, and that is not a way that we want to keep functioning. So in the crisis intervention team model, police officers are partnered with usually someone with an EMS background and someone with a mental health background. And that can come again in public or private agencies, depending on the nature of how the partnership forms. They go out into responding to certain kinds of calls as a team, and the police officer in those teams is not the first out of the van, so to speak. Often these are teams that respond in vans. So it's the mental health professional or the EMT, people who are coming with more of a health focus, who will be the first out and will always be the only ones out whenever that's possible. Our understanding from where this has been implemented elsewhere is it is often possible. That's often successful. But by the nature of the kinds of calls that are going on, that it's also important that there be a police officer among the team that goes out so that if the kinder, gentler intervention isn't successful, those individuals are not waiting for police response in a situation that is escalating beyond their control, that they have a police officer who's with them as part of that team. It is not clear that we're going to be able to do this. This is going to take resources as well. This is going to take a lot more planning and collaboration among the agencies, but there's a conversation that has begun. It's just in the very initial stages between the police department, fire department, hospital, Brattleboro Memorial Hospital, Rescue Inc., HCRS, and Groundworks are in a conversation around at least sort of how to learn from each other's experiences around de-escalation, and possibly to form some sort of a partnership for something that would be on the crisis intervention team model. Which brings me to my conclusion and a couple of points that I think are extremely important, so I want to share. I mentioned earlier that Yoshi Manali has been with us for 2 weeks, and Chief Norma Hardy has been with us for 4.5 months. You will be addressing in the coming months. My expectation is probably the best timing for this is going to be as warm weather comes back to us. So, sometime in the late spring or going on into the summer months, but you may choose to go faster. You may choose even to go slower than that. My main point in this is work with your team, work with the community, find your pace. There is no hurry to this work. The money has been set aside. You want to get it right. You want to invest in the alternatives in a way that is, sort of materially beneficial, where there's a process that makes sure that the money is put to good work, and that the initiatives coming up out of the community get a chance to really thrive. And when you're making the decision around the staffing level in the police department, you want to have a fully informed police chief and a fully informed town manager able to work with you together, along with the input that you'll receive from the community in making those decisions. And so while those two things are things we know, I have heard, I'm sure you have heard, we've actually heard together in prior meetings around these topics, that there is some degree of urgency among some folks in the community. I respect that, and I worry that rushing to make decisions about how to allocate the community safety fund and rushing to a decision about the proper staffing in the police department could lead to decisions you would regret later. I think it would be better to take this in a more methodical manner. And the fact is that the money isn't going anywhere because it's been created as its own separate fund. And there is no chance we're going to be bumping up against 27 officers anytime in the next couple of years. We're trying to get back to 20 at this point. So there is time, and I urge you to take that time and continue to receive input and think about the alternatives before you make those decisions.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
All right, let's hear what my colleagues have to say. Who wants to begin? Good comments, questions?
I'm actually kind of curious if members of the public, I don't know, we've been pretty involved in all this, and I don't know, there's a bunch of people there. We even have a person here. And, I have some questions, but people
Is
may
everyone
have
okay with that?
questions that are burning in them.
I'm okay with that. Most of my questions and comments have to do with sort of getting a little more detail out of some of the specifics.
Yeah,
But if you're all comfortable with
All right.
kicking it over to our viewers.
How about our audience? Would you like to begin? Tell us your name and where you live, and then
Sure.
ask away.
My name is Sandra Stromberg. I live at 33 Eaton Avenue. I come tonight as a homeowner, an educator, a parent, a volunteer within the community, a member of the Brattleboro Floral Arts and Garden Club, and a desire to be more involved in town affairs now that my children are older. I'm concerned because I owned one home with my family on New England Drive, and in 2015, there were 2 intruders in the house with me while I was alone for 30 minutes. At that time, I'm an activist and one to get things done on my own, so I involved the community in the neighborhood, and I hosted a meeting with, at that time, Captain Kerrigan. And he informed us that that year in 2015, break-ins were up in Brattleboro 300% from the year prior. So that was a shocker to all of us. And we worked as a community in that neighborhood to look for the signs that Chuck Cummings, bless his heart, had gotten many years prior. They went missing, but we communicated with each other via email and text when we saw strange cars and other vehicles we didn't recognize, or people going up the road. There were often break-ins in cars on that road at regular intervals, but we communicated and came together as a neighborhood, which was really nice. I moved away for a bit last year and came back to Brattleboro and bought a house on Eaton Avenue. And my first night in the residence, I was broken into again. I live on my own. My kids are with me every other week, and I sleep with a tire iron next to my bed. Thankfully, I was able to get Tim and Tim from HSS and Dick's Lock Repair there the next day. And I just want to know the statistics on what the break-in percentage has gone up since 2015 or this year. As a woman that lives by herself and is vulnerable and scared when I'm on my own. Yes, there's a security system. Yes, there's locks, but I have friends that are constantly dealing with this and are living with spouses or people who can protect them and run down the street to get the perpetrator, but they're having their doors bashed in. And I'm scared. And I'm coming to you also as a member of the Brattleboro Garden Club to say that when we garden at the Creamery Bridge, we use multiple gloves because we're finding needles when we're weeding and taking care of the gardens there. And I just want to make you aware of that, you know, on TripAdvisor, that's the #1 destination in Brattleboro, I believe. Or at least it was. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's a constant, you drive by there, and I just don't want our community to be known for that. And that I'm glad to be here tonight. And if I could just get some answers, if there's any statistics, anyone knows anything. And I'm just coming with my disappointment and concern tonight.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
Peter, let's go to you first.
Yeah, so I want to offer you my card.
Sure.
My business card.
Thank you.
Because I think that the best way to address the concern that you've raised would be for us to connect you with Chief Hardy. Chief Hardy's listening tonight, but I was here, I could give you my card. If you communicate your contact information to me, I'll make sure that she gets it. We'll make sure that you have an opportunity to actually talk with the police department. I don't have that data handy. I don't know that the chief necessarily has it right at her fingertips either. Mm-hmm. And importantly, what I want to stress is that the work that we're talking about tonight that came out of last year's community safety review really speaks to situations where it's not addressing the kind of criminal activity that you're talking about. We're well aware that
right.
There
it's
is
the trauma and the top, you know, bringing people down from crisis situations.
Exactly. So there is real crime occurring in this community every day, and there is law enforcement action related to criminal activity that's going on in this community every single day. Chief Hardy, since she's been here since the end of last
Right.
July, has had a lot of interaction with people, individual people in the community who have had these kinds of concerns, so that she can learn from you and together, talk about what the police department is doing, what the police department could do
Right.
that relates to addressing criminal activity in the community. The body of work here is really much more about
The trauma.
and preventing
supporting. Mhm.
circumstances where, particularly people who are psychiatrically labeled or psychiatric survivors, or people who are drug users, who sometimes show up in situations where all we have had to offer as a community in the past is the police, and they're really not the right people to respond. And so we're working on trying to find better ways to be a safer community that are separate and apart from the recognized necessity for the police department to provide good law enforcement within our community.
And that first, and then I urge our community to come together and develop a sense to wrap around services for ourselves and hug ourselves and say we can do this and it's okay, and rise up to be the Brattleboro that we can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Okay. There's one hand up.
We have one hand up, which is Kurt Dimes.
Very good, thank you. Kurt, please join us.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Kurt.
My name's Kurt Dimes. I work with Brattleboro Common Sense, BCS. That's the organization which researched and promoted the plan for limited police disarmament. The plan was endorsed by the committee, and one part was specifically endorsed, that is for the police to attend public meetings and functions without their sidearm. And Peter spoke on that issue particularly. I think it's a little bit offensive that, Peter, that you imply violence will break out and the police need to be armed in case violence breaks out at meetings which are controversial. I've been here only 20 years, but I've never seen any indication that violence was going to break out, even at the most contentious meetings. So I'd like to see some data on that to show that, we need guns present to put down riots and such, and that we have such a violent public here in Brattleboro, as you imply. I don't get it. Maybe you can come up with some statistics on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. Are there more people with their hands up, Patrick?
There's a couple more. Christopher Kane is next.
Thank you. Mr. Kane? Good evening.
Hey, how are you?
Oh, pretty well.
Sorry, I can't see myself, so I don't know. Hope this is a good angle. Did you not want to address Kurt's concerns? Okay, all right, then no, that answers it. My concern was when are we going to implement these concerns that the police pretend that they're having? I'm wondering what the next step is into implementing these things where the police don't show up into mental health not disorders, just issues where someone feels the need to contact somebody and the only number they know is 911. So when is this going to actually be implemented in Brattleboro? Thank you.
Yeah, I can speak to that, not with a date, but what I can tell you is that, and if you've seen the fuller description of the status of the 41 separate recommendations that's in the implementation table, there's many of the recommendations have actually been implemented. There's a couple I mentioned tonight and others that have been implemented exactly as we were asked to. Then there are some that are being considered and addressed and implemented in ways that are not exactly how we were asked to, but in ways that we think are feasible and appropriate for the town to do. And then
Peter, may I cut you off? Is that all right? I truly appreciate.
Let Peter finish and then you can comment again. Thank you.
So I tried to speak earlier to, and I'll reiterate now, that the setting aside of $300,000, 200 of it is in the pot, another $100,000 proposed, to invest town resources into initiatives coming out of the community that are going to move that needle in terms of providing alternatives to police. Some are intended to build community capacity to help us avoid having those kinds of conflicts out in the community, and others are intended to provide a better way of responding to those kinds of conflicts in the community. But at this time, when we don't have the alternatives in place, and there's a situation where individuals are threatening themselves or others in the community, the police are going to continue to respond.
The host would like me to unmute. That's great. I wish that happened to me like a couple weeks ago. That'd be really nice to not interact with the police when I was going through a really hard time.
Thank you. For your
However, the police with guns showed up in my house. That's not okay. That's all I got to say, I guess.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, the next is a little mysterious. This is Big Ol' House of Fun.
That sounds kind of sketchy.
Debating.
Sorry, nothing sketchy. I just joined real quick and forgot how to change my name. I'm so sorry about that. I'm Jackson. I live in West Brattleboro. I just wanted to talk about a specific concern. Peter, you had mentioned that the Safety Review Committee had recommended that police don't show up to public functions armed, and that the chief of police's response to this was alternative uniforms that look more like plain clothes and that the firearms would be concealed. I don't understand how this is a safer solution. In nature, animals have bright colors so that you can tell who's dangerous, and I don't understand how setting the precedent of plainclothes cops concealed carrying in public spaces increases the safety in those spaces at all. That seems like a gross misinterpretation of the committee's proposed recommendation, and I don't see how that is a safe precedent to set in the town. That particularly really terrifies me, and I don't think I'm the only one who would be feeling that way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next one I believe is Dick DeGray.
Mr. DeGray.
Thank you very much. I'm going to disagree with Mr. Dimes and the last caller. I'm a strong supporter of police officers having their weapons with them. And if they're concealed, I'm really fine with that. Mr. Dimes referenced he's been here for 20 years and we haven't had any escalation into violence. To me, that's not the issue. When you think about actually the anniversary today of Sandy Hook, which is quite sad to think about, is that violence can break out at any time, at any place. And Brattleboro isn't utopia. Maybe we like to think that it is, but no town, no city, no place is completely safe anymore. And I want a police officer there with a weapon, and it can be concealed, to not only protect himself, but also to protect the individuals at an event. That's what our police force is for. And I strongly support the officers continuing to carry concealed weapons if they're out of uniform and in plain clothes. Wherever that is concealed, I'm fine with it. But to think that something cannot happen in the town of Brattleboro, you are so far off the mark. And it would be such a detriment to our town that this committee made this recommendation and we followed it. And we had a number of casualties because someone said that our police officers shouldn't be able to protect themselves or protect the community at large. So thank you for your time, and I will continue to listen.
Thank you. Patrick is next.
Alex Fisher.
Alex Fisher, please join us.
Hi, everybody. Happy Tuesday night. Hi, thanks for having this meeting. Peter, thank you for your, I just always love a chart. So thank you. Easy to understand. And thanks for the memo. So many things to say, right? This is such big, important work. And I think I'll just say two things. One is that the research has been done. People have been really clear and the recommendation has been made around cops carrying weapons in public meeting spaces. And so I just really want to reflect back what folks have already seen in the CSR report and what has been accepted as a recommendation. I'm disappointed at the interpretation of that and just want to just really point back to the report and to the findings there for that piece. And then secondly, excited about the fund, excited about money for alternatives. And I think for me, I don't, my work in the world is doing finance work and making finance work accessible to folks, to democratizing the power of managing resources. And so when I think about the process that's underway with the fund, the big questions for me are, how are those folks that are most deeply affected by police and policing, and also those that are most acutely situated to address what's in the community safety report findings and what the town has already agreed to as some of the ways to move forward? How do those folks have say in how that funding is used and what the criteria is, who gets it, when decision-making happens, et cetera. And so again, just really putting in there that the creation of the fund in itself is an incredible first step. However, the most important piece is how it's allocated, how it's actually used. And so we just want to be careful of patting ourselves on the back for making a fund that we don't know what the impact is of it yet, and also the importance of who's making decisions. So again, what we're talking about with the community safety work is spreading out the work of keeping our community safe. Right? We're talking about, it's not about the police doing everything. That doesn't work for anyone. It doesn't work for the police. It doesn't work for citizens. It doesn't work for any of us to have all of that power and responsibility in only one place. And so to me, the essential work of the community safety sort of umbrella is, how are we spreading out this work so that way all of us can speak to our strengths in keeping community safe. All of us can speak to our strengths in building up deeper community. And I just want to really bring that into the fund in terms of that is a major resource that needs to be allocated in line with all of the other ways that we've been talking about giving folks access to power. And so with that, sorry for the long rant, but just sort of, again, curious what is moving forward and how that's going to be established. And it's not a rush on allocating it, but it is really hard for those of us in the community that are working on projects that could use that funding, that are in line with at least the community safety report and hopefully in line with where the funds will be allocated. It would be great to know, how is that money, who's going to make the decisions? What's the criteria? So that piece I would say is going to be important to move forward. The actual allocation and the divvying out can take a little more time, but it's important for those of us that have been here waiting to know what is that process looking like?
Thank you. Peter, would you like to reiterate those comments?
Yeah, well, what I would say is, I think that to those who have ideas right now about how that process ought to work, you ought to reach out for town staff and or select board members and offer that input. And to everybody who has an interest in this, I think the town owes, advance warning and lots of loud announcing when there's going to be a time that the board is going to actually proceed into decision-making around this, so that there's an opportunity for folks to be involved in both the process of determining how the money will be allocated, and then, the understanding of the allocation as it occurs. It's what I've suggested tonight. It's not the only way forward, for sure. It's at the discretion of the board, but what I've suggested is, based on the transition that we are still experiencing within town government, where the leaders of the functions that relate to this work within town government are one new in their position and the other just arrived, not quite in the position fully yet. I think it's important to give them some time to be able to participate in that process in a way that's helpful to the board, along with the community members who are going to participate in that process. And as I understand it, and as I've described it, the entire purpose of the fund is to support the kind of spreading of sharing of responsibility and the opportunity actually to prevent. The part that I'm most personally excited about, I don't really know exactly how this is going to work. There's a number of different things that are being considered by folks, I know, and I'm really hopeful that they will achieve their desired end or their intentions, is the way in which we'll actually have less incidents occurring in the community, that there'll actually be work that makes us a healthier, safer place in how we live together, so that it's not just less police activity, but less of any intervention activity that's required. That by definition has to be through shared resources, because the policing function is something essentially different than that. Building of neighborhood capacity or building of peer-to-peer capacity.
Can I just have you repeat, because my brain is a little bit full at the end of a workday and this meeting. If you were me and you were like, I wanted to talk to someone who is going to have an impact on how I've talked to select board members who said the criteria and all of that is most likely going to come from town staff. I think I talked to you and you were like, it's not happening yet. And so kind of like, where would you point that excited community energy?
So to a little degree, it would depend on the specifics of the energy that's being expressed to me. I'll say to you, because you and I have had conversations around these issues, I know where you're coming from. I know that it focuses a lot on having a good, solid process. I think you should be talking to Yoshi, and I'm happy to make that introduction.
Great. I would love that. I'll totally follow up after this. And I don't know, I'm assuming, Yoshi, you're here somewhere in the internet. So I'll just say hi, looking forward to meeting you. And what a wonderful and wild time to be the town manager of Brattleboro. And also just Peter, your last report back on the CSR, I just want to also give like a huge thank you and appreciation for, your personal work and personal growth in being open to new ideas from the community, from yourself, and really bringing a lot of this work forward. this is your last, big hurrah in presenting things. And so I just want to say thank you so much for all the work that you've put into this and all of the ways that you have modeled being open to new ideas and to really listening to a lot of different opinions and voices. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. There are no more hands.
There are no more hands. All right. Should we start on the right? Let's see if select board members have comments.
Or the left, as you're looking at us.
Oh, I'm far right, far right.
You always have to be contentious,
Oh, of
don't you?
course.
So I have a like list of little questions,
Mhm.
and yeah, no big broad statements. Except that I would like to respond to Kurt and Jackson and Chris. Just to say that I do agree with what they're saying. I was curious what specifically was meant by a community event that cops were showing up to in plain clothes with concealed weapons. Is it speaking at Rotary Club where they think they'll encounter danger, or is it the 4th of July celebrations where maybe there could possibly be some wild drinking and celebration? But I just wanted to say, about that. I hear Dick DeGray and his feelings about the amount of risk that he's willing to tolerate as a community member at a community event. But I definitely agree much more with Kurt, who is acknowledging that there are so few incidents of violence in Brattleboro that it seems like overcompensation to have officers armed at community events. I also want to say to Chris, I'm so sorry that happened to you a few weeks ago. I'm so sorry that you had a bad experience with the police coming to you in a moment of crisis. That is really terrible. So I guess I had a question in there somewhere, Peter.
I think Chief Hardy can speak to the decision-making around how it's appropriate for police officers to show up. I want to say on her behalf, as Patrick invites her into the meeting, that she's communicated with me very regularly throughout the 4.5 months that we've worked together about all different kinds of things. So I feel as though I have a good feel for how she is making decisions, not just the decisions that she is making. I want her to be able to speak for herself about this particular calculation that, frankly, I don't think as a community we're going to be able to agree on exactly how it ought to be calibrated, but I think it's important for folks to know how she's thinking about it. I personally have been grateful that in her consideration, it wasn't, even though she hasn't felt comfortable fully embracing what was recommended to us, she hasn't said, no, we're going to show up, we're going to be in uniform, we're going to carry our firearms, this is what we need to do in order to keep the community safe. She hasn't done that at all. She's tried to find a calibration that is respectful of the fact that an officer in uniform with a visible firearm can in and of itself feel traumatic for people. So not be that person. Be a person who shows up in plain clothes, be a person who's interacting with people in a way that is less formal and standoffish. She can speak for herself about the safety concern and the reason for carrying a concealed weapon at those moments.
Welcome, Chief.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Peter. I would like to address that. I'm sorry, it's been a very long day. In regards to the officer being how the officer's dressed, how the officer's not dressed. When this was presented to me from the very beginning, when I first even started in my position, this conversation came up, and by no means was this that I want to have some covert feeling or way that I want to sneak weapons into meetings or any such thing like that. You know, this was presented to me, and I thought in good faith that it would be a way to still protect the people that are in these gatherings. And it wasn't community gatherings so much as large gatherings where I know the potential for people to carry out attacks. One of them being select board meetings, all right? Because you have all of your town officials sitting in one room, in one place, in a place where anyone can walk with weapons, anyone can have weapons freely out, all right? Because in Vermont, you can do that. And you do not have to have a license for it, so you can have any type of weapon. So my thought was that if there are some people in the community that feel harm if we're showing our weapons, but still we have to protect the entire community, then that was my only thought process. Okay, you know, it is firmly up to the select board. You know, I could have said, you know, well, we won't be at any meetings, you know, and even being at meetings in uniform without weapons puts my officers in danger for simply being the police. So I've tried to come up with a way to be able to protect who we need to protect, or in my thought process, which is the public. And I'm perfectly open to any other conversations or meetings or anything else on this subject. I won't, you know, continuously talk about this subject tonight because this really was not why we were here. But I think that it's very important because, you know, I've heard people talk about how they felt insulted or they felt that I didn't respect or my department didn't respect their feelings or their questions. And quite honestly, I feel insulted. You know, that I would come up with some covert way for the police to be in any of these situations. So that is a very easy subject to talk about because, you know, like I said, my job is not just only to try to work with some members of the community. My job is to try to work with all members in the community. And that has become very hard for me because I have people that want my help, that ask for my help, that meet with me on a daily, like the lady that came to the beginning and talked about how her fears of people being in her house. So for me to have to address those issues and then also try to address the issues of people in the community that feel harm, that feel fear of us, of the police department, is a very, very thin line to walk, you know, and I've been doing my best to walk that line. You know, to present, give everyone their say. You know, like I said, I still have an open door policy, so anyone can have their say. But I find that what I get is if I try to toe the line in the middle that has come to my public service, has come to my job, and has come to my department, I find that I come under attack or my department comes under attack. And I thought that that was what we were trying to get away from for any part of the community, which we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Have you finished your comments?
Oh, that was just one of many questions,
Okay.
but we could take turns if that would.
No.
All right.
Let's go person by person.
Great. So I have a question. I have more questions, probably best addressed to Chief Hardy. So there's a couple of them. The first is, you know, looking through the recommendations and thinking about the budget at this time of year, and also thinking about, you know, the future gaps that might be left, for example, by eliminating the social worker program from the police department. So one of my questions was the town helping to support that social worker program financially? No, not at all. Okay.
That was paid for by HCRS.
All right. So then the follow-up question was, what are the current alternatives to welfare and crisis checks in the community? now that there is no longer the social worker working at this police station.
Is that for me?
Please,
Yeah, sure.
yes.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Right now, and that's the issue, right? I think when I came on and they had the social worker program, I thought it was a good idea for us to have someone that was not the police for individuals that were in crisis to have someone to speak to. But as I read the recommendations and saw that that was something that was not acceptable to the committee that did the report. So after I started to do my own research with how this program had been going, it had not been what I would consider it had not been what I consider a way that idea would work, as far as the community feeling that it was an asset to them for us to have the social worker. I still feel that having a social worker is a good idea. I just did not see the kind of results in the past that I would have liked to see with the program. And speaking to some people that would speak to me, that had to deal with that person and that social worker kind of aspect, they were not satisfied, and they didn't feel like there was enough separation between the person that was supposed to be for them and the police. And since we've already talked about separating a lot of our response from people that are in crisis that do not need a police response, I just felt at that time the program itself was not working properly. And that's why I asked to suspend it and not get rid of it completely, because it may be a way for it to be a something that we can utilize until the crisis team idea has been put into fruition. So I didn't want to leave just a big gap there. Right now we try to, if someone's in crisis, we do try to call mental health professionals. We do contact them and try to get their guidance. And sometimes just even this week, we've had to contact someone, and they've given us, and been able to get the person to go in and get the services that they needed. So sometimes it just works just to be able to make a phone call. And that's why I didn't suspend that completely. But there are people that we call. We do call whoever's on call for HCMRS. We call mostly them and ask them for guidance as to how we should proceed if the person that's in crisis is willing to speak to them and or follow what they might say, because some of them, they know the people, so they feel more comfortable speaking to them.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that actually leads to a question I have for Peter. And it's about, some of these things we're relying on partners to do. We're relying on partners to think about alternatives to policing and other safety systems. And what are the supports that the town is giving to that work in its ideation phase, in its infancy, as it sort of grows and emerges and becomes something that can really contribute to the
Sure.
safety?
For those who have approached us, we're sitting down and having, in some cases, limited conversations, in some cases, some very detailed conversations around, what they're working on or what they think they'd like to be working on. Some of this is, as you say, ideation as opposed to actual program development. I really would defer to the people who are developing those ideas to, comment at some point on whether or not our interaction has been useful to them. I don't think that's for me to judge. What I've been keenly aware of is both in the way that these recommendations, that part of these recommendations from the report came forward from the review, and in the interaction that I've had with people in the community around some of the potential alternatives that are being explored. They can't be town driven, right? They've got to be more organic than that. So that's why it felt to me like the most important thing the town could do, and it speaks to this actually in the report, is the town providing tangible support for work that's done by others in the community that will be not the police, but also not the town. And so creating the fund, I think, was really important. I want to speak perhaps a little defensively to the comment that we shouldn't be patting ourselves on the back for the fund. If I sounded that way, I am excited about it. I don't mean to be patting ourselves on the back about it. I think it is important that it's been done in this manner so that it remains available. And what I'm excited about is its potential. We can't point to what it has accomplished. We don't know what it will accomplish. But the fact that there is right now 200,000, likely to be 300,000, perhaps more in the future, where the town can put its money where its mouth is in supporting the community in creating greater safety and reducing the role of policing, I think is very exciting. I can't speak to it more explicitly than that because there's really quite a variety of ways in which it's showing up. And I'm sure there's stuff that I don't know about. I know about, I'd say probably 6 or 8 distinct efforts that are underway.
Wait, wow, I may.
That's great. That's great. And that takes a lot of time and work and people power to make that happen.
Right.
I'm just thinking about how the town is offering not just conversations, but other potential resources for the planning process, for birthing of these new great ideas.
But you know,
You can't have it both
you
ways.
can't have it be outside of the town and the town orchestrating it at the same time. They're two different things.
Yes, but that doesn't mean the town has to orchestrate. The town could provide other resources, space, or a small amount of funding, or, you know, I know that a few of my friends work at HCRS and they're struggling with capacity, with people power and recruiting the people that they need to do all of the work that they have. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but it was thinking about how the town might support the work in, you know, not necessarily being directly involved, but providing other resources besides the community safety fund, but that can help encourage and empower these processes. Okay, other questions? I have a lot of questions. Is that okay?
Go right ahead.
Peter, did you want to say something else?
I'm sorry?
Did you want to say something else?
I was going to follow up, but let's go on to your, I don't need to, and you've got more questions and I'm sure the other members do too. So.
Yeah, one of the topics that we sort of dug into a little bit at our August meeting was the CPCC and its work in support of accountability of the police department. So I didn't see any tangible progress made on that. The recommendation was to disband the CPCC and fund a process that rebuilds some sort of accountability mechanism that's accessible to the community. So I just wanted to name that as work that hasn't been done in the last 5 months, 4 months that we said we would do or think about doing. We didn't say anything about doing
We
it.
actually did, may I?
We said we wouldn't do
May I speak to
it.
that? Yeah, we
Sure.
actually said in August, we said, as far as staff work on that just wasn't something we were going to get to in this next 3 months. You know, August 31st being really only three months and a little bit more, but you know, we were putting together this report over the last week. So basically we had a 3-month window of time as opposed to that initial period that was longer, and as opposed to the time that's still out in front of us. We're making progress. There's still a lot more to be done. What I'd say explicitly about CPCC is if the select board believes it's important simply to do away with it, you have that authority on any given Tuesday night. What I personally own and have suggested to you is to consider the way forward on that topic, and that would be something you would get to in 2022 with, in August, I wrote to it as the new town manager and Chief Hardy, now known to be Yoshi and Chief Hardy. I do think that's another one that needs to be addressed. That one is squarely with the town, right? That's a town organized, administered process that I think is actually pretty universally recognized to be at least inadequate, if not something worse than that. It's not serving a good constructive purpose, but the folks who have served in those roles have done the best they could with the structure that was established. So we need a different structure. And the recommendation was do away with it and then go through a process to create a better structure. Honestly, I personally have a concern about that particular sequence of events, given that it would leave a void of any kind of public accountability, on a sort of month in, month out, checking on things basis. And so what I said plainly, I want to say one thing that sort of overarches this work. On the areas where we haven't moved forward with what was specifically recommended to us, we've been really transparent about why. There's a few areas where actually the implementation isn't legal under Vermont law, and so those things just sit. In most areas, there is some real consideration that's been given to what was brought forward, and either as a matter of prioritizing our work or as a matter of having some concern about actually just implementing it as it was recommended and thinking that there needs to be a more complex process of, sort of finding the way forward. We've been really clear, tried to be at least really clear, and not pretend that we're doing something we're not doing. So on CPCC, what we've said is, we think that we ought to create something better. We think that the essence of the recommendation is, good for the entire community and an important thing for us to do. And leaving a void by just getting rid of it and then figuring it out felt not the best way to go. I have said, in first person singular. If the board disagrees, if three of you disagree, all you got to do is vote to disband the CPCC, and it's done. It's not set up by ordinance or some other more formal mechanism that is, and even at that, you could think, stop ignorance, but you have the authority to go in the sequence that is recommended to you if you think that's better. I still think that you getting some advice sometime in the next 6 months-ish, probably, from your still relatively new police chief and your new town manager, and hearing the further input from the community, and then deciding how, as a select board, discharging your responsibility accountable to the voters, that you intend to move that piece of work forward, I think is the right methodical way to be about it. In the meantime, we have a flawed system, but at least still a system. There's still a mechanism for people to call out concerns about the police department.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to, whilst we were on this CPCC conversation, I just took a quick look at the minutes for the last couple of meetings, and the last meeting took all of 8 minutes from, beginning to end. The one prior to that took, I think, 15 or 30 minutes. And so these are meetings where if there are complaints addressed to the police department, is that correct? Mm-hmm. They then automatically end up at the CPCC?
Yes.
Or there's like a...
So a complaint from the community about the police department is investigated. There's an outcome to that, and the CPCC is advised of the complaint and the outcome, and sometimes has discussion around it.
I see.
Internal matters of like somebody not performing right or violating a rule or something doesn't go to the CPCC. We deal with that as an internal personnel matter.
Yes. So a complaint would arrive at the CPCC after there's been some resolution or some response to the complaint by the department.
Yes, that is true. There also have been circumstances. I want to be careful because I am not a CPCC expert.
I'm not an expert either. That's why.
But I'm aware of circumstances where somebody brought a concern to the CPCC that wasn't a complaint about a particular officer, but was just a general concern about the department. And on those occasions, it just comes to the CPCC and there is discussion about it at that setting, and it doesn't relate to the department having made a finding about a complaint.
I guess I just wanted to double check that, like, people out in the community who are interacting with the police department that may have, you know, an opinion about how it went and maybe not a favorable one, are still getting in touch with the department, letting folks know that, you know, what their concerns were. And maybe those things don't end up with the CPCC. I don't know. I mean, it just seems strange to me that there's so little activity in that committee. When it seems like there's a lot to say about the department's function, both good and less good. I don't like, honestly, the disarming officers at community events and disbanding the CPCC do not feel to me like the two things I want to spend like a huge amount of time focusing on this. Like, there's a lot of stuff here. Peter kind of alluded to some of that kind of community partner building alternatives thing that I've yet to hear fleshed out all that much, and maybe it can't be fleshed out that much, but I'd like to sort of dig into that a little bit. And I don't know. So I guess I'll just shut up and say that.
Okay, well, when Jess is done, we'll see what other comments like the rumors have.
Sure. My last one was another one for Chief Hardy. So it's about training, and there is money in the budget for police training. And it's been level funded as recommended. But I think the heart of the recommendation was that there were some trainings that were leading to potentially not great comments on incident reports. For example, when they were called to a mental health or crisis call and some used force, there were some comments about how dangerous people in mental health crisis could be. And folks writing the report really felt like that was the training that taught them that may have been very biased against people with psychiatric diagnosis. So, to sort of dig in a little more about the heart of that recommendation, I'm just curious, Chief Hardy, about your 4 months around here and getting to know the training programs that are available and getting to know your officers better. One of the comments in the report was to create individual training plans for officers that really matched their readiness with appropriate training that didn't encourage escalation of interactions with folks with psychiatric labels. And yeah, so I'm just curious if you've done any work in that area or have plans to sort of tackle that, because I would love to eventually invest in more training for officers in those areas, and would love to hear like a really stable plan that goes along with the recommendations in the report.
Okay, thank you. And actually, I appreciate that. You know, because it is hard sometimes, you know, just knowing what the report has said, the short amount of time that I've had to really dive into what the recommendations were and work with Peter, with the town, with members of the community. So, you know, I could never say I would not ask for more training money. It's just that it wasn't at that point, since it was something that was mentioned in the report. So what I've tried to do in the meanwhile is because we, you know, I have studied that and the comments that were made on the training that have been available in the past. So during this time, since I've been here, I've actually had de-escalation training for my officers. I brought experts to Brattleboro and had them do escalation training with us, all of us. And, you know, using the continuum of verbally speaking, you know, and down and so down. And I also, in that same vein, Peter talked about a product that I've been researching, and I've actually had it demonstrated for us. And I feel that it will add to another tool for the officers to have, that it will not physically harm someone, which is really, really what, we want to be able to help, not hinder. And I think that, along with working with Chief Howard in developing the team, where we can step back, I think all of those things have to work together to accomplish really what everyone really wants, and that's for us to have less interaction with individuals that are going through crisis. But I think the biggest step I was able to accomplish right now in this time between August and now has been to have this de-escalation training. And the individuals that I was able to contact have been called all over the world to train. So not just in the United States, to deal with different situations and have just a way of de-escalation that may be a little different from what everyone's used to. So I'm very happy about that. And I'm constantly looking for other things, training. We've just had fair and impartial policing. So we're moving away from the set standards of the past that have been what police training has been, and we're trying to find new training. And two, I also welcome people. I've had some people that have contacted me and said, have your officers heard about this training, or have you looked into this training? We feel that it would help them better deal with members of our community. And I'm very open to that. If someone has a training that they think would help, because as I've stated from my first day, and I'll continue to state to my last day here, I would like for the department to be a part of the community, and I would like the community to feel that we are their department. So the ways to do that are just what I am trying to, introduce into our training, our way of being, our way of handling, our way of speaking, and everything else that we're trying to bring into the department. So yes, so I applaud you too for actually saying that you are open to that in the future, because training is expensive. I've been fortunate that I've been able to ask around and make certain phone calls and get people that we could actually afford to have. But that would still give a great training experience for the officers. And what I like about my department and the officers that I have here now is that they've been very open to the training. I have not had one person that said, we've had this in the past, or they've all been accepting, they've all been open. And so I know they're open to learn, and it's up to me to help them do that and introduce these things that will help us, come back into the community and gain back the community's trust.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay,
I'm done.
you're done.
For now.
All right, Tim, you're up.
Thank you. I'll try to go as quickly as possible. Thanks. I was going to say thanks, Chief. Hang on, but no, don't hang on, because I can just say this. Can you hear me all right? I'm trying out this new mask, and I just don't like the audio.
I know, we all sound kind of muffled.
I know.
but-
Say it loud. Say it
I'll
louder than you
speak
think
loud. Okay. Louder than normal, you mean. So on the training thing, I thank you for sort of going in that direction, because that was one of my concerns, probably from a different perspective. So the chief actually answered my question in answering yours to some extent. The one thing I wanted to point out about police training is that Peter, your memo didn't reflect this, but it's certainly fair that you didn't reflect it. But I want to just remind the public that the police training was not a 5-0 vote. The decision to keep the funding level. There was a request from staff, and it was a 3-2 vote. So I was one of the two that voted against level funding, or is it for, yeah.
It was level funding.
Yeah, so I was not for that. I thought it was one of the weakest recommendations that we received in the community safety report. I continue to think that, but I'm certainly happy if, in the report itself, if you recall, the language is to focus on the more efficient use of the current training budget. So I think it's certainly great if Chief Hardy is going in a direction that's making more efficient use of town funds, certainly. But I'm not in favor of just cutting off training for some sort of, I don't know why there would be an ideological reason to not want to train our police, because trained, talented police is exactly what we all want, right? So anyway, so I also want to use that to kind of get into an overall comment that I didn't expect to talk about, because I didn't expect this to suddenly turn into a discussion about arming or disarming the police, but it has. So I want to just say, and my colleagues know that I often struggle with my filter. I'm going to lift my filter for a moment and just say that I think of all of the recommendations in this document, the absolute worst recommendation was to disarm our police. I will never vote, don't vote for me if you want to disarm our police, because I will never be in favor of that. But the first person to speak here was somebody who has legitimate concerns about safety. And I think in the effort that we're all trying to go through here to keep our community more safe, and to have, if we have individuals that don't feel safe in our community, we want to lift them up to everyone else's level of community safety. In that process, we do not want to make a substantial number of our residents less safe. So this is a really important effort that we're making here. I urge everyone who is excited, and I include myself in this, I'm excited about so many things in these recommendations because they're setting us down on paths that I never thought we'd go down. I actually am a big fan of looking into this crisis intervention team idea. Obviously, I want it to be coming from the community too, but the CIT idea is a really exciting one. And I've been reading about how it has been working in other communities. So that's good. That's a great direction. There's no mas palomigras, which has already been implemented. There's all kinds of small victories in here, I think, for community safety. I would urge anyone who wants this whole process to be successful in the end, let go of the weakest ideas, and absolutely the absolute worst is to disarm the Brattleboro police. Okay, I'm gonna get that out there. So as far as a question, I had a question about Project CARE and the $16,000 that has been moved to Turning Point. And I just am wondering if there will be a process, or we could come up with a process in the future, because this, I think, happened recently. Can we come up with a process that we can effectively track the effectiveness of that program? And what kind of discussions with Turning Point you might have had in that regard, whether it's you or the chief wants to chime in? Or...
So it would be the chief to go into detail. What I would say is we focused, you're right, even in the wording of the recommendation, there is some reference to tracking. We focused in the first instance on pulling the police back from that process as being what we thought was sort of the highest priority, or the essence of that. It is true that it's $16,000 of the taxpayers' money that's being turned over now to Turning Point to run a program, and it's appropriate for us to have a good, clear understanding of how that program's going. I believe, based on the communication I've had with the chief, that the ongoing communication she is having and will have with Turning Point about the program to understand, sort of what is happening in the absence of police authority over it, does provide some sense of accountability there, but it's not very transparent. And we should give some additional thought to whether there's a reporting mechanism that might be appropriate, that could be, no names, but just, sort of numbers and description of over a certain period of time, a certain number of people were helped and that sort of thing. I think that that's really doable, and we ought to pursue it. we're not in a position where we could describe that in detail tonight.
Chief, want to chime in?
Norman?
Yes. When it comes to this, this was one of the things that was brought up. We talked about it in August. So, I talked about it with my lieutenants, particularly my lieutenant that was a major part in starting Project CARE in the first place. And so, and I also met with the individual that, is the integral part of this entire thing. And, after meeting with him and seeing the work that he's accomplishing, I felt that it was a good idea. Sat down with Peter, felt that it was a good idea to give him and his organization a bit more responsibility, and also to have us move back from some of the initial aspects of the whole idea of that it's the police coming for someone who may need help. And as I've said numerous times, of course, we understand that addiction is not a crime. And I think that played to that, especially after meeting with him. I won't mention his name because I don't know if he wants his name mentioned, but I met with him and I was extremely impressed with him and the idea of the project. And I just want to make sure you understand too that when we say just handing over, it's not just handing it over, right? It's just restructuring how it's being done. So, we're letting the individual from Project CARE and letting them be more responsible, but also to be in the forefront. But we still have meetings. We have, because I know you talked about accountability. So, we still have monthly meetings. My lieutenant will still have monthly meetings. And those are not meetings to say what individuals are doing. Those are meetings to see if they need any more input from us as far as keeping structure, as far as keeping records, as far as being anything that we can assist them with, as far as if they need us as a resource. So we're really it's really a restructure of us. Instead of being to the forefront, now we are taking the step back. We haven't completely taken the step out as far as any follow-up, but we've tried to take a step back as far as the actual interactions and, and see if people feel more comfortable seeking these services. The monthly meetings are not just with us and this particular aspect of Project CARE, but it's for quite a few different entities, including BMH, ACRS, Groundworks, Habit OPCO, probation, and parole. So it's a monthly meeting that goes on, and that is to keep a structure, as I think you're asking about, Tim, and accountability. So that way that the community will be able to know what's being done with those funds, and also see what progress is being made by these individuals, and just have it as more of just another resource for the community to be able to utilize.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, and I just want to make it clear that I think Turning Point is an excellent organization to be, sounds like at the lead at least of the effort. And so I don't want to give people the impression I don't have faith in their efforts, because I know what great work they're doing in the community. And again, it's part of this effort to take some of the burden off of the police, who, in many cases don't want that role, and the role has fallen to them in the past and in many communities because literally no one else is there to do it. So that's part of these changes we want to make. So anyway, thank you for the explanation.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so we usually take a break at 8 o'clock. So let's take it early and then we'll go to the other side. How about 5 after 8?
Right.
Thank you. Welcome back to the Brattleboro Selectboard meeting. We are continuing with Selectboard comments on the community safety review. Let's continue with Mr. Quick.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome.
Clerk.
Yes. Is this volume good? I'm guessing it is. Someone will say, no, it's not good. I wanted to start out by saying thank you for all of this work. Most of this work that's represented in these implementation matrix, and certainly, this memo, it is not the 5 of us that did this, it's town staff, it's Chief Hardy, who's been here for 4 and a bit months. Peter and the town manager's office obviously is an integral part of it, and Yoshi and Ali will continue to be involved in this work, I should assume. And so I just want to say thanks, because none of this stuff would have got as far along as it has without that work. And Peter, you mentioned earlier that in 2 weeks you're retiring, right? When that happens, this work will continue with the board's support and direction, but with a lot of staff time. And so I just want to be clear in my thanks about that before I dive into loads of nitpicking questions. My first question really is when will we check in next about this? When is a good time for another kind of implementation check-in, thinking about the schedule, in the next few months? Obviously, Peter,
Peter,
but January and February are usually pretty.
I have an opinion, even though I don't have a stake.
Yeah.
My opinion on that is April or beyond.
Yeah.
And I think that you ought to pick, right? Is it going to be your first meeting in April, or is it going to be somewhere up beyond? But prior to that, you not only have a brand new town manager, you have the run up to town meeting, which is the most intense time of the year for just the broader array of town business activity for town staff. So that would be my suggestion, is that you look at least to April.
Okay. Makes sense to me.
New board.
Possibly new board, yeah. Okay, so that's a simple question. In thinking about this community safety fund and the desire from, that's been voiced several times for a process, we have, I was about to say we have a plan for making a process. We certainly have an intention to develop a process for how to use that fund in an equitable and accessible way. I was thinking about how in the past we have put out RFPs for things, and it also spurred a kind of recollection of the Working Communities Challenge, which led to the thing put out by the Boston Fed that had a ton of money attached to it and said, was essentially a big request for proposals, but it was a challenge, right? And I did sort of wonder whether there is a similar sort of Brattleboro community safety challenge that could be created. And I did also wonder whether there is money out there nationally and regionally that could supplement the potentially 300,000 in the community safety fund. Because as we all know, that 300,000 is more like seed money rather than the whole thing. So I am not smart enough and experienced enough to be able to answer that, but I wanted to kind of put it out there and see if we can.
I think that's a Yoshi question.
Yeah, I think it is a Yoshi question. And Yoshi, I hope you've got your pen working.
I've made a note to pass on.
Thank you so much. So those are kind of two wander-ins. And then more concretely, I had a member of the community come to me looking for the kind of information that is in the police department's monthly report. And this is a very easy fix. Every month, the departments across the whole of the town put out a monthly report, and it's included in Selectboard material. But it's very, very hard to find. Okay. And I think it would be beneficial to everybody if there was a part of the website that just housed department reports, and you could see them going back. And I think they always make for kind of interesting reading, but they're usually kind of buried in the select board material. The police department report contains, you know, a kind of overview of activity and also then pretty detailed information on the kinds of calls that they've been going to. And last year, I spent a fair amount of time kind of looking at that data, trying to understand what it all means. And, you know, it's a way that you can sort of see trends. In the absence of like a really easy kind of data tool like we hope we'll get with Valcor, it's at least a way for community members to have more transparency around like what the department's up to, what kind of responses they're being asked to give. So I would love it if we could do that, but not only for the police department, right? For all departments. Okay, so that's that. And then the big question, I think, is around this notion of collaboration with organizations that exist in the community or that may be formed in the community. You know, you've alluded to initiatives already existing and conversations already beginning. I just wonder, you know, people may be a little more excited or trusting if we could give some kind of specifics to that. And I feel like I need to have some more specifics on it too. And I understand that these are probably early conversations.
So, let me first, I mentioned to Jess on the break because it was the thing I almost added when she was asking about this. And I thought, no, I should stop, and because she had additional questions and all of you have other thoughts to share. Now, since we're back to it, let me share with all of you what I shared with her, because I think it'll give some perspective about the degree to which there isn't a thing, there's lots of things. There isn't a course, there's lots of potential courses for the town to have a positive impact on this. So I cited for Jess 4 specific examples I can think of interaction I have had with individuals about work that they are not doing alone, work they're doing with organizations or at least with groups of people to sort of develop an idea into something that might be an initiative or a program that is fundable. 2 wanted to talk to me about sort of the overall body of work and how the town is approaching things, and explicitly wanted me to stay out of their business in their planning. They were really clear to me, this is ours, we'll tell you when we're ready to talk about it. The other 2 were much more desiring of some interaction, some collaboration with the town. One was really interesting, talked about not needing money. You know, that fund, that's fine, that's good, that's gonna help some people. We don't need your money, but you know, potentially some help from the town related to either making some town-owned real estate available or helping them locate a good parcel of land on which they could then pursue the thing that they're thinking of. That was really interesting and frankly, to me, unexpected. And so, you know, a different way of helping than what I thought might be available to the town. And the other one was just really plain and simple about, you know, we can't build momentum for this effort without your money or without some money. And you're saying you want to invest in these things, get to it. You know, the counterbalance to that is what I've already said a number of times, so I won't dwell on it other than to say, you know, there's only $300,000. I really like the idea that maybe there's a way before these decisions get made about how to allocate it to build it up into something more with other people's money. That's really cool and not something we've pursued. And so, you know, that is something town staff can look at and hopefully bring back some good news on that front. But yeah, so there's all these different competing interests, right? There's people who want us in, people who want us out, people who want it fast, people who don't necessarily need it fast, but want to make sure that it's real. Like they don't know what it is yet. And that's fair because we don't know what it is yet. But it's a real commitment. It's just not a real thing or real process yet. It will become.
Okay. That's helpful. Like, I think that's all.
Thank you very much.
Wow.
Ian?
Yeah. I echo the thanks from Mr. Quip to town staff, to Chief Hardy, to Peter, yourself personally, to all the work you put into this. It really isn't the select board, it's everybody else that's doing this work in a real way. And I feel optimistic. I continue to feel optimistic. I have a couple of reflections and then a couple questions. So my first reflection is just on how both this seems like a very new kind of radical idea for the town to be looking for alternatives in policing for some of these things, but that actually, in some ways, this is very much in my opinion, a component of like Vermont municipal government. I see this as mirroring in some ways the human services, in the sense that the legislature says, all right, towns of Vermont, we recognize that there may be third-party organizations providing services in your town that would be way more expensive for the municipality to provide. And so we give you the ability to give money to those services because you recognize that they're giving a valuable thing to your community. And this community safety fund is us recognizing another issue, that we can now allocate funds from the municipal government to the community to address this problem. And that's not new, and that's not really I'm realizing we're not recreating everything here. There's some systems in place that allows for a municipal government to really do this successfully. And that's some of the things I'm kind of been worried about. Can we actually implement this well? And I think we can. And I think that what I'm hoping is that by involving the community so deeply in this process from the very beginning all the way through, that it is going to provide for a successful community-led initiatives being funded, that we will really be able to support those things coming out of the community because the community's been involved throughout this whole thing. So that's kind of my first reflection. My second is, and this kind of speaks to a point that Peter made, I really feel strongly on giving Yoshi time when he comes on board for many reasons. But the one that hasn't been spoken to yet that I think is important to say is that Peter has given a lot to this process and brought with him and his experience. He has shaped how this process has gone in incredible ways. And I want to give Yoshi an opportunity to do the same thing and to really bring his experience, his life experience, his professional experience to shaping this in an equally different, positive way. And unfortunately, it just takes time. You know, these things just take time. And it's one of the things that I've learned being on the board is that we have to respect the time and we have to respect the staff, that these things take time, even if it can be frustrating. So those are my two reflections. I think my first question is to Peter. I want to know whether in your now year of working with this material and reflecting on processes and systems in other communities, whether there is a particular community you find yourself going back to who has been implementing things you see as successful, and if there is one, is there a way that we could more formalize that relationship?
Yeah, that is a great question. The answer is no. They're not. But here's the thing. Yeah, there's a but. The answer is no, that there hasn't, from the interaction I've had with other communities around this work, there hasn't been a particular one that's, wow, you know, they're like, 6 months ahead of us and getting it right. Let's just, borrow some of that and make it ours. One really great thing about working in government is that we want to be collaborative with other governments as opposed to like companies that are competing and guarding their information. Government officials are sharing information all the time with their peers. So there is real opportunity there. I think it is something we need to actually consciously think about, seizing such an opportunity or opportunities, maybe like a coalition even, that might better the outcome for all the communities who choose to be involved. It's not something we've done. It's not a way I've thought about the work. So I don't have a better answer for you off the top of my head.
No,
I like the idea. I think it's something worthy of giving some thought to and talking about, with the other municipal officials with whom we deal on these kinds of issues.
yeah, well, I appreciate that answer. I think it's just something I've been reflecting on in this sort of feeling like sometimes I do feel kind of isolated, like we're trying to figure this out all on our own. And it's such a bunch of things to tackle. And the reality is, nowhere is Brattleboro. Brattleboro is unique in itself, but every community is tackling these issues in some way, some better than others. And we should really utilize and build those relationships if we can.
Absolutely.
So I guess I'll talk to Yoshi about it more, and cool. My next question is there any concrete thing that we can do to move the crisis intervention team concept forward in a way that, because I kind of understand where we're at.
Yeah.
Is there, yeah.
The chiefs will advise you when they need some action from the board that can build momentum for that. The conceptual discussions that started, I want to say in the summer, it might have been in September, I'm not sure exactly when, were tangible. There was real interest in this from the parties who have come together, and there's a variety of reasons related to individual illnesses and other schedule conflicts that caused multiple meetings since then to be canceled. So that the group has actually only come together and worked on this in a conference room one time. But there's been some other communication going on around it. There was an intent that there would have been probably 3 or 4 of those kinds of meetings by now, and it would actually be starting to maybe take some shape. It hasn't, not for lack of interest, just for the reasons I cited. So my expectation is that sometime pretty early in the new year, you're going to hear more about it. It may need actions by the select board to help it move forward. It may not, actually, depending on what shape it takes. The whole idea is the town being a participant, not necessarily the primary organizer, right? And so depending on how it evolves, there's how many? 1, 2, 3, 5 or 6 groups involved. Established organizations that are sending representatives to the table to be part of talking about how this might work. And so, maybe the town will be ultimately the sort of central point on this, and maybe it won't be. Yeah. So I think, that'll come. I think it's important to note on that. I think it's especially important to note this because of the fact that this is something that relates to this work, but didn't come directly from the 41 recommendations, that the group itself recognized that their own organizational relationship with de-escalation, the way in which they understand de-escalation and use de-escalation techniques and have trained on it, isn't consistent across these different groups. And they want to be a team. They want to create something here together. It might end up actually getting legs. It might not. But before even pursuing, like, how would we organize ourselves, there's going to be some group de-escalation work to create a better understanding, a broader understanding for the whole group based on the variety of different ways in which the different participants have used. Yeah, I think that's important. And that's going to be what happens the next time the group gathers, which I expect will be sometime in January, but I don't know that for sure. It'll go on from there.
Thank you. I think my last question you already answered, but I'm just going to sort of reiterate it. So from Alex actually asked it. Basically, I had the same question Alex had, which was, if I'm a community member who's interested in this, like, how can I access this in the meantime while the board decides on how the fund's going to work? So I hear you. you can just say to me now that you'll pass this along to Yoshi, that that there are community members who are interested.
Absolutely.
That the door needs to be open so that the town staff can be available to speak with people as this process evolves.
Absolutely to that, and broader than that, I think, and I tried to say this earlier too, I want to emphasize it now, especially I guess since I won't be in a position to make sure that it happens this way. So I'm in most situations around this handoff, I'm trying not to say what you ought to do in January, February, and March. I think that's important for you to build your relationship with Yoshi and go forward. However, I on this one, I have a very strong opinion that you should go slowly. You should give this time. And so what comes with that, I think, is my obligation to also say out loud, when you are ready, there will be people who have shown the initiative and had the time, had been able to, not just first of all wanting to, and then being able to stay engaged with town government as we go from here to there. But when you're arriving at there and you're about to decide how to proceed with this equitable, accessible process of allocating the funds, I think you need to shout it from the rooftops, get it in the reformer and send it out on all your social media. And, we probably won't have the more robust town website up and running by that time, but, on what we've got, the town needs to put it on the front of the website and just in every way that you can think of, maybe mentioning it at a couple of select board meetings in advance of the time when you're actually going to sit and talk about it. But because there's going to be some delay, because people are busy and might not be able to, notice at just the right moment when it's announced in a more subtle way, I think it's incumbent upon the town to really push hard to let people know we're about to undertake this work. If you want in, come in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. That's it for me.
All right. I just have a couple comments. Again, I also would like to express my thanks to Peter and his staff and Chief Hardy for their hard work. And I think what we have heard tonight is the continuation of a logical enrollment of appropriate measures. And I'm happy to continue with this process. I also think that we need to recognize that this spirit of change and this awareness of community safety is imbued in everything that the town staff does and select board does. It's more than a select board goal. It's a far-reaching thing that we do as a town government. I also think that collaboration of the sort that we're contemplating is really a hallmark of Brattleboro government, and it always has been. I think Project CARE is an excellent example of the police department recognizing a need for collaboration, and now further they're stepping back. So I think that's an excellent example of what the town does and what the town is capable of. The town is capable of stepping back and allowing others to fill the role. I also think that we all need to recognize that we're in a transition period now, and patience is required. And people who are dismayed at having the same old procedures in place need to be patient and need to exercise, the same open thinking and collaboration that we need to work together to affect this change. So I'm again grateful and happy that this is proceeding, but I recognize that this is a long-term project, and it's more than just warm weather that we need. It's time to affect the change that we're looking for. Thank you. So, anything else you want to talk about?
We got some.
So many hands.
There's hands.
There are hands. There are 6 of them. Would you like to?
Yeah, let's have 2 minutes a hand, please.
Okay, the first hand is Shay Witzberg.
Good evening.
Hi,
Hi.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
My name is Shay Witzberg. I live in West Brattleboro. And I was one of the co-facilitators of the Community Safety Review Project. Profound honor. First, I want to say, I don't know that 2 minutes is going to be enough. I really would hope that at least Emily Megas Russell, my co-facilitator, could speak after me. And there's a lot of really relevant things that we want to just remind you of for this sort of break from meeting about this until April that I hope can help percolate what's next for you all. Firstly, I want to say thank you so much, Peter. Congratulations. And the way that you have modeled openness to especially marginalized community leadership, touching your work has been I'm so grateful for it. So thank you so much. And we know that Yoshi has to fill, and we trust him to fill them, and we'll be hopefully able to continue meeting with him as community members in the way that you made yourself accessible to folks. So thank you in your last meeting in this capacity. Ian, I was really grateful for your reflections just now about the way to keep engagement about this work and create community generated solutions. And I agree with you. And also a tiny nuance in my heart is that even just today, I heard from BIPOC community leaders about how inaccessible these meetings feel because of the inherent white supremacy of this type of meeting space, which all select boards generally, not just Brattleboro's, have these really long-standing structures that are somewhat alienating. So I hope we can continue to work on like actual inclusion in these processes. And just as we worked on that also in the community safety review, that was a challenge. And I acknowledge the ways that my whiteness is a sort of a liability in that way. It can like facilitate co-optation more easily. And it can make meetings like this really difficult because you're always hearing from us, but what you all don't see that I see is these super connected networks of work that are happening outside of your view. Tim, I wanted to respond to what you said in continuing that by saying there are these organizing networks that are working so hard to keep people safe right now, actively tonight, without violence in this community that I don't think you all have a lot of a window into. And I have to work myself in decentering my own perspective about what's best for especially people who are more marginalized than I am, especially Black and Brown people. And you talked about wanting to uplift everyone's safety. And I feel like my reflection as a white leader in this work has been that it is a necessary challenge to decenter and not paternalize to other people than myself about what they need. And the community safety review, a primary goal of it was to center the voices of people most impacted by policing. And they told you through that project what they want and need. And if your perspective or opinion differs from that, that's okay. But we have to consider the scale of these voices, and your voice is one. And there are many voices in the community that want permanent jailing for people who rifle through cars. We can listen to that, but there's a lot more people that want us to be considering ways of making the community safer without threat of state violence. So nowhere in the recommendations does it suggest disarming police for responding to burglaries. That recommendation is disarming police occasionally in meetings with only other executive directors of nonprofits, as an example, right? So we really need to think about the scale of harms that we're talking about when we're considering these responses. Related to that, I feel like accountability work is really difficult, and we're all doing it. All of us who are showing up to change work have to do our own accountability work, and critique is not an attack, and disagreement is not an attack. And conflict is something we all have to work to continue to hold together. So I hope that we can continue that as Peter steps out and this work continues. I hope you all can continue to center the voices of people most impacted by these systems and center the sort of like do the ego work needed to like accept critique and disagreement and allow it to touch the work and shape the work without it becoming an attack or versus kind of a situation. And I think that's been a moderate success of this project so far. So I hope we can continue that.
Okay, that's 5 minutes.
Yep. I think that my hope is that Emily can speak also because she was going to touch on a couple of other things for the process. But again, Peter, thank you. And we will, I'm sure, see one another again, maybe in April about this lifelong project. So thank you guys.
Thanks, Ed.
And the next up is Gary Stroud.
Thank you. Hello, Gary.
Hello, everyone. Gary Stroud, District 2 Representative and Vice Chair of CPCC. It's coming on. I want to thank everybody for, recognizing our work too. Thank you, Tim, and everyone else on the board. It is a dauntless and thankless job in some cases. But also we have to recognize we have others in our community that we care about and that we want to help out as well as with just, not just with the police, but also with coming to a common ground that we all can agree on. I know it's not easy too sometimes, Peter, to find that happy medium as we all like. So listening to both sides of each one's situation coming to that, I like to ask anybody and invite anybody to attend one of the meetings, be it in person or via Zoom, to get a better idea and the meat of what we do rather than just on paper statistics. Because sometimes you can get a better and broader perspective and what it is it entails, and then it basically and just complaints, but understanding it a lot better. And that's like with anything, just like with your school board or any other committee meeting, rather than just reading, but doing it, going in person and getting a better thought process out of that. So that way you can come to a better conclusion that's, fair and pretty much honest across the board, so everyone can understand where each one is coming from. As far as the funding the police, I have to say, basically, yeah, I heard a lot of people saying how safe Brattleboro is in that retrospective, but we're not immune to what other things and other elements that are like happening in other cities. We're blessed to not have that stuff that's happening in a lot of schools, in the communities with rioting, shooting up schools and all that. But who's to say that we don't have that happen somewhere, but we need that safety net. And that's the key I'm looking for. Where's that safety net that's going to be in place when that situation does happen? Disbanding, dislodging is not the answer. It's coming together and working as a common ground to figure out what is the best solution to move ahead together as a family and as a community to work things out. Families don't disband whenever they get into an argument. They come together and work things out. That's the way I see it, and that's what I believe. And if we can sit down and have this conversation and dialogue with the police and with other resources that are out there, I believe we can come to a higher ground and a better understanding and a better community and an example to other communities that it can be done. And that's not the answer to just get rid of things. We just don't throw things away unless we feel, oh, it's not something that's beneficial. We have to figure out ways what we can do to improve it. So that's why I ask if anybody feels they want to come to one of the meetings. I trying to get an answer pretty much to how many people have ever attended a CPCC meeting other than just reading about it, to get an understanding of what it is we do. So that way you can come to a real honest assessment, that's fair, because it is a hard job to do. And like, as far as with complaints, whatever we get in is what we put out. We can't go door to door knocking. Do you have a complaint? Do you have a complaint? This is something that we sit there every night, taking time out of our time in our life to do for this community. So I think people should really take a step back and see what it is we do before we come to any conclusions. And again, I'd just like to thank the board. I'd like to thank the audience and everyone else out there hearing this. We have to come together at some point. I'm looking to meet with Yoshi as well and come to a common ground. We got to start working together. That's what it's going to come down to in the future. I'd like to thank everybody else out there. Have a good Christmas and a safe and happy New Year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Patrick?
Next up would be Mr. Dives.
You
Hello, everyone.
Once again.
There was no need, no comments or no response to Gary. All right, then. I would like to further clarify about the proposal that Tim objected to. The community safety review team did not endorse anything, any simple disarm the police plan. So Tim is misinformed about that. And I wouldn't want that misinformation to be spread around too much in the public. The committee did endorse the Brattleboro Common Sense Plan for police to carry guns, to not carry their guns on routine patrols, but to have them available in armed response teams or in their cruisers. So the guns will always be available to the police, but they just wouldn't carry them on relatively routine and safe operations. Brattleboro is a safe place. There's not been a policeman killed in action in Vermont since, I think, 1960. And our concern, at least as far as the CSRT was formed, was for public safety and the public's concern to feel safe. So let's stay focused on that. I think it's the removal of the police weapons at meetings is really a very simple thing. And this general principle could be applied in most of their routine patrols and by emulating the police in the United Kingdom, where they don't kill so many people in terrible accidental police killings like we do here in the United States. 1,000 people a year are killed by the police. In England, generally 30, 40, 50 a year. That's not explained by a difference in gun ownership. It's a matter of training and policies. In Germany, a couple of years ago, no one was killed. They did, however, take their guns in hand. The police did unholster their guns 9 times. So with proper training, we can make the public much more safe, and we can make the public feel safer and start a different way of the police interacting with the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. Who's next, Patrick?
Next up would be Robin Morgan.
Robin Morgan, please join us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to everyone who is working so hard at trying to make our community more safe and implementing the recommendations of this study. I just had a couple comments. First of all, I would love to see in these meetings more space made for feedback from the facilitators of the community safety review. We've had a lot of time in the meeting for people who have a perspective on certain aspects of this work, the police chief, town manager, and select board members to give their perspectives. So limiting the facilitators of the study to only 2 minutes seems really unnecessarily rigid to me and limiting of the point of views expressed here. I think that, the biggest thing that it should be happening as we proceed with this is continually centering the perspectives that were expressed in the whole community safety review process. And I think that the 2 facilitators, Emily and Shay, would do a really good job of bringing those to the forefront rather than centering their own personal views. So I would love to see more time for them to speak in these meetings. I also wanted to say that I think what we really have talked about in these meetings as true safety is meeting people's basic needs so that it diminishes the need for crisis response, of which the police is one option. And I think that really focusing a lot of energy and funding on that would help everyone feel safer, including diminishing the workload on the police, which I know is very extreme, especially with how understaffed they are. So I really think that needs to be made a much bigger priority as we continue to carry out this work. And I would love to see that the one-time fund that was created be structurally integrated as an ongoing fund in perpetuity that can have, you know, their funding increased, or like Daniel said, maybe searching for creative ways to supplement and get grants to fund this work. But really creating safety for everyone here is going to solve all of the other problems. So that's what I would like to see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Emily Russell.
Emily, good evening.
Hey, folks, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you for calling on me. Actually, I'm pretty confident that Jillian was before me. I'd like to ask us to hear from Jillian first, and then I'm happy to come back on.
You're here. Let's go.
Alrighty. Sorry, Jillian. Yeah, so thank you for, dropped my phone. Yeah, thank you so much for making the space again for this. I'm glad to hear that we're going to continue to have ongoing check-ins on this topic. And I also want to express a little bit of gratitude too for like just this sort of being able to really seriously consider the concerns, not just that are brought up in this meeting, but also the concerns that are really represented in the report and in the community, you know, particularly the concerns by those most impacted by policing. And that's really a big part of what this report was about, the spirit that this report came up around, the need for us to look at community safety outside of policing, but also the need to look at policing and its impact on the community. And I'll say a little bit more about that, but I want to say just quickly to Peter, thank you so much for your leadership and your advocacy. I think it's been really quite powerful. And I look forward to working with Yoshi in your shoes. So a couple of things that I want to bring us back to in regards to the report. I'm Emily Russell. I'm also one of the co-facilitators of the Community Safety Review Committee and the report. I want to remind us that there was an intention to the order, the way in which the recommendations are written. So just to remind us, there's 4 categories of recommendations that Peter and his team put into a great graph to show us what the progress looks like on each one. And those are acknowledging and reckoning with harm caused, increasing accountability, meeting basic needs and building up alternatives, and then reducing police presence and role of policing. There's a bit of a linear kind of timing to that, although some of them are also very ongoing. And I want to actually bring our attention back for a moment to the first 2 categories, acknowledging and reckoning with the harm caused and increasing accountability. And my concern right now is that we could easily breeze over those as sort of done in certain ways, and some undone, as we talked about with like the CPCC and oversight of the community safety, of the police. But that the reckoning work and like acknowledging harm work, like that's a huge part of this work. We're not just talking about building up alternatives because we want to, fund new good ideas. We're talking about sitting with the immense amount of harm that policing as a system has done to the community, Brattleboro community members, as well as people in other communities across the country. And so I just want to keep that piece of the work in the room that acknowledging and reckoning with this harm is not something that I know as a white person that I'll ever be done with in my lifetime. These systems precede us, and we'll need to reckon with this consistently and ongoingly. So I want to invite that back in. I do want to acknowledge to Peter's comments about the CPCC being a flawed system, but a system. And Gary, I appreciate your work so much for the town and on the CPCC. And I also continue to stand behind the review that we did do of this particular system, and that it's not actually effectively addressing this void, that the void doesn't not exist because of the presence of the CPCC. The void is there. The void is a void of accountability. This placeholder is not serving the purpose of accountability at this time. And if you want to learn more about that and why I'm saying that, that information's in the report itself. I want to highlight that the CPCC and the police social worker program, which I'm so grateful that y'all have suspended, I think that was a great decision based on the recommendations, is really the reality that good intention does not equal good impact. Good ideas does not automatically mean that good idea implemented is going to do good things. And so often when the good ideas are coming from already established systems and bypassing the reckoning with the harm, they're likely not going to actually, in implementation, lead to good outcome, lead to good impact. And so that's where the slowness and the intentionality and the coming together and the rethinking and reckoning and really understanding how these systems have impacted communities, how these good ideas, when implemented, have impacted communities. That's where I think we're really needing to collaborate, and where we are collaborating. That's very exciting to me. But I just want to remind us that there is that void of accountability. It's there now, and it's not being dealt with right now. The last thing I will say, thank you for the time, is regarding the Community Safety Fund. I really, really urge the Select Board to use this opportunity. It's a wonderful opportunity to get really creative and quite radical with the way that y'all use power. I recognize that the final decisions legally will have to be made by you in terms of who gets the money, but that does not mean, in my opinion, that the process at all needs to be completely held by you. And this is such a beautiful place to share power and to invite in, and not just invite in to tokenize, but to invite in to really deeply listen to and allow leadership to be held by people in our community who have, true alternatives or have the potential to build true alternatives. And to that, I will say that in the report itself, if you look at recommendations 13 through 18, this report didn't just look at how the community is harmed by the police and by carceral systems, such as the crisis team, that it also talked about what people want, what people need in terms of safety. So when we're looking for parameters around how to use that community safety fund, I really encourage us to look back at recommendations, specifically 13 through 18, which give a lot of good information about what we heard people say they needed and wanted out of alternatives that this fund could support. So that's it for me. Thank you so much. And I'm grateful to be here and for all of y'all.
Thank you. Patrick, is there someone named Jillian?
There is, and that person would be next.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I definitely would like to thank Emily and Shay and everyone else who's been involved in trying to listen to the needs of the community and hear them about safety. I understand that there are members of this community and the Select Board who believe that police need to be armed to keep themselves and the community safe. That belief automatically assumes that there is always the possibility of a potential threat of violence from members of the community. Yet what these same people either can't or are unwilling to understand is that the presence of armed police means there is always the possibility of a potential threat from police to members of the community. Regardless of how many cisgendered, able-bodied, neurotypical, or white people have been taught to consider that they can rely on police as a form of safety and support, that is not the same for almost any other demographic. The personal identity of police officers does not change that, as they are still police, yielding more power over almost any other member of society. There are members of this community who have been directly harmed by their interactions with police, and they have shared this within the Brattleboro Safety Review and within various public meetings, this one included. These people need to be listened to more and believed when they share their experiences. Despite how much money has been funneled into training for police that has not stopped, yet alone lessened, the violence police commit against people within this country. In fact, even more money has been used to increase the arming or weaponizing of police, including various styles of militarized training. Now, I'm fully aware that as I say this, many people will be thinking that this doesn't apply to Brattleboro, Vermont. Brattleboro is safe. Brattleboro police are different. Earlier, someone said, quote, to think that something cannot happen in the town of Brattleboro is off the mark, end quote. And I want to say that I agree. It is entirely off the mark to think that police cannot or do not pose a threat to members of this community. It is off the mark to consider the fears people of this community hold about the police to be invalid. Society, Brattleboro included, is long overdue in their need to create, fund, and support forms of community safety that are not systems or organizations that originated from white supremacy, nor that continue to perpetuate oppression of the people. I know that an intense level of work went into the community safety review, and I believe that the select board needs to be more open to following their results and recommendations as they stand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up would be Christopher Kane.
Christopher Kane, please join us.
Hello.
Hello.
I just want to reiterate everything that the past totally radical women that have spoken before me. And I just want to say that I don't think that I have a place to speak right now because I'm a white guy. However, I was totally, completely indoctrinated into the policing system, and I just saw that as something that is not okay for other people.
Thank you, Christopher.
Looks like the last one would be Farmies.
Very good.
Again, thanks y'all, and thank you, Peter, especially, and staff for all the work that you've done in moving this forward. I guess the one thing that occurs to me between this meeting and last meeting is it felt like earlier on in this process and tonight and in discussing the housing action plan last week, there seemed to be a tendency to, you've received these reports that, tons of work have gone into them, a huge amount of effort on the part of staff and the community. And there seems to be a reluctance to actually accept what is in those reports in a lot of places. That the housing action plan was, spoke eloquently about the problems with insecure people who are housing insecure and overburdened by excessive rents, and how that was, kind of a central issue to the housing issue in Brattleboro. And the CSR report spoke just as eloquently about the challenges faced by people who have the most interactions with police. And it seems like there seems to be a little bit of tendency sometimes to decide that on your own, those things don't really matter, even though that, we've got ample data and a huge amount of effort that has gone into actually demonstrating that those things do matter to a lot of people. And I hope that, I hope that trend doesn't continue, and I hope that it doesn't happen with the housing action plan as well, and that we don't find ourselves a year from the release of the housing action plan still trying to get to that basic point of actually legitimizing and centering the voices of people who are most affected by systems of oppression, and actually address their needs. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that's the end of our public commentary, Patrick.
That is correct.
Anyone else have any comments to make about this evening's topic?
I'd like to respond to that. I can understand that there's there are a lot of recommendations in this report, and within that housing action plan, there is a great deal of information to kind of process and figure out what is the path forward. But I do not think that in either of these situations I would characterize it as a reluctance to kind of look at what's in this report and work on it. I think that, speaking for myself as a select board member, both moving forward with a careful and well thought out and hopefully effective implementation of many of these recommendations is important to my service on this board. And the housing action plan is a newer piece of work that has been produced that the board authorized the spending to create. And so we will, during this, the next couple of months is sort of the path to town meeting. Some of us are up for re-election, but those two of you that are sitting on the board, will definitely be here after town meeting. And I would expect that whoever's on that board alongside you two will consider this work and the housing action plan as like two major pieces of work that they will continue to undertake next year. So I just, I know Far and I will agree on some of these things and will disagree on others, but I just think that to characterize the board's work and town staff's work as not really wanting to deal with this, I think is just wrong.
It reminds me, Daniel, of the adjective you used last week about the housing plan that, we want to see something audacious. And I think what we have incrementally proposed here for the community safety is equally audacious. And we're not patting ourselves on the back, we're moving forward. Anyone else like to say anything before we adjourn?
Yeah. So that was a lot of input from community, and just one of the things that I'm feel like I want to sort of talk through with the rest of you is this idea of a potentially non-paternalistic radical approach to the specific work that we have to do as a select board on figuring out how to distribute the community safety fund, how to figure out what the accountability system is and how or if it involves the CPCC in any way or changes there. There are some things for us to be doing. And because we can't talk together outside of public meetings, and it's where is the space, or when are we going to make space to have those conversations, which really need to be sort of action oriented, and we need to explore ways we can really think about these processes that we're gonna tackle. And Yoshi will be a part of that, absolutely. But like we've said again and again, Yoshi is new to all of this and new to Brattleboro. So I'm just asking for your thoughts on how to make space for these conversations that we're going to need to have together.
Well, I think we've said several times this evening that from now until April is spoken for. And so we will not, I mean, we can incrementally discuss with Yoshi and each other, what plans are bubbling up from the community and so forth. But in terms of options and ways that we will be addressing the community safety fund, it won't happen for several months. I think we all feel that way. It's because of town meeting mostly and elections, and when then, the board constitutes itself or reconstitutes itself, then, we'll refocus on these issues. And in the meantime, Yoshi will have a better sense of, where he is on these issues. And, we'll take advice from town staff and the community. But as Peter says, these decisions, especially these financial decisions, are ours to make.
Yeah, I think, and just from my perspective, like it or not, the work of the board is done in public. So, we're gonna do it in a meeting. We'll set an agenda. This is just how I'm seeing it. We'll have an agenda setting meeting and we'll put it on the agenda, whoever's in the leadership at that time. And then it will be discussed amongst the board and with Yoshi. I think that he'll be a pretty integral component of it, which is one of the reasons I really do feel like we need to give him a little bit of time. I don't really know if that's true, but that's just my feeling. Because I just see how integral Peter is to this, and we're moving into what is one of the really critical steps of this whole process, which is actually allocating funds. So, and I'm excited to see his opinion and his recommendations to us on it. So, yeah, that's where I'm at. Yeah. So give Yoshi enough time to get his feet under him and to get his head around this. And then when we feel like he feels like, and we feel like we're ready, set it on an agenda item, make sure it's really public and everyone knows when it's happening. And then we discuss it, figure it out, and then hopefully implement it with enough time for the community just to access it.
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't want to take up too much time. I just want to say at the end of this memo, there was two things kind of hanging, right? And one is the process and criteria by which the select board will decide on allocations from the community safety fund. Those are decisions to be made further down the road. I'm very open to having a more radical and open and inclusive process than before, and also being the final decision maker. But I am open to imagining a process that will invite in people in ways that the town has been unable to do. But the final decision will be the board, and that will be a warned item, So I just wanted to kind of let you all know that I'm open to thinking about it, and I'm open to hearing suggestions on what that might look like.
All right. Anyone else have anything to say? Or I'm open to a motion to adjourn. Either or.
Were you happy with that? I mean, I feel like I'm the only one who didn't address your question, but.
Sure, no, that makes it really clear. I was wondering what might happen between now and April on that, but it sounds like really not much of anything until April, after town meeting, after there's a new select board maybe, and then work on that will start.
And I would just say, and it's really important to me, and I hope I was clear enough on this, that the town staff is accessible to the public and to community members who are interested in this between now and then, right?
Yes,
Because
definitely.
they're going to be tapped in, everyone's going to be tapped into this, and as the discussions are moving along, and so no one's left behind because it's a little bit of time just due to the scheduling of town meeting and everything. So,
Yeah. And I think Peter reiterated earlier that town staff is available or not available as people would wish, because everyone's different.
I was just gonna say, and we're accessible, right?
yeah.
Yes.
We're very accessible.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say one thing that there's along the way, especially tonight as well. There's been a couple of these implications that operating the way we are operating is somehow improper. There's these vague ideas that white supremacy is at work, and because we're all white, we're not following proper processes or something, or being able to hear voices that wouldn't normally be heard. And I'm very open to trying different ways of gathering in those voices and different ways of involving decision-making. But I do want to caution everybody who is implying, in my opinion, there's an implication that somehow we shouldn't be making the decisions about these very important policies and future policies for our town when we are the elected representatives of the town. So I see that you can push this idea that we are somehow not the representatives of our town a little too far, and you push your position into being anti-democratic. And I think that's a very dangerous place to be. And I would caution anybody to imply that this board is not keeping everybody's, to the best of their abilities, keeping everybody's interests in mind, because I certainly am to the best of my ability. And if you don't like my ability, you vote me out. That's the way democracy works. And I'm gonna like stick my feet in the sand from democracy and not imply that we should just hand over very important processes that are supposed to be in our laps to someone else's lap.
To unelected people,
Correct.
because we were elected to represent all of Brattleboro.
Right, along with town meeting, who will be hopefully approving some of our ideas and rejecting others, but.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Tim.
Thank you.
All right, now I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Good night. Thank you, everyone.
You had the vote.
Oh, the vote.
That's a little vote today.
After my whole speech about democracy.
His feet are in the sand.
Democracy.
All right, all select board members in favor of adjournment, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. 5-0.
Thank you.
Oh, I should use my.